This is your show, so you can ask whatever you like. Your questions run the show, really. So don't be shy. Go for it. This is a group, I think, one of the least judgmental you can find probably around. So if you want to share anything, just share, because you never know. You might get some answers. You might help others as well get answers for that. So I think that's it from my side. I'm going to give the voice to Steve. I'm hoping that he's going to have some prescriptions for us. Steve, over to you.
Well, the synchronicity has started already, Greg. And for all of you who are here, by the way, welcome. And I can't see everybody's faces because my screen's loaded up with different things, but I know we've got quite a few people on the call, and some of them are new names, some of them are very familiar names and faces, but you're all very welcome. And I give you my 100% word that I did not load Greg with his introduction. He always puts in the last sentence to try and throw me off balance. And I actually quite like that, because I find being off balance better than being in balance. So I'll get on to that very, very shortly. Now, I'm going to start the way you should never start anything, and that's with a confession. Last week, as you know, we don't have a script for these things, but I do have an idea of how I'm going to start the evening. And because after that, as long as we make the first step, then we allow plenty of room for opportunity to strike. But I did have one idea that I was going to mention with you, and it was about the Formula One motor racing driver called Fernando Alonso. Has been a previous world champion on several occasions. And he has a curious tattoo on his back. I think it's between his shoulder blades, or it's on the lower part of his neck. And he was asked what this was. And he said, well, it's a samurai symbol. And samurais come from the ancient Japanese culture. They were fighters, warriors, and very much involved with Zen and control of their mental state to do what they had to do, which is a job that most of us, fortunately, would not have to do. So this samurai tattoo is a symbol. And when Fernando was asked, what does it actually mean? It said, I will live my life as if I'm already dead. Now have a little think about that. I'll live my life as if I'm already dead. And I guess if you're driving a racing car at 200 miles an hour going into a corner, I don't know what that's in kilometers, but it's pretty quick. And sadly, people do lose their lives in this sport. In the 70s, they were called the killing years because most of the top motor racing drivers were killed in horrific crashes. Makes you wonder why they do it, but they do. And I guess when you're driving at those kind of speeds, you can't be thinking about your family and your mortgage payments and stuff like that. And I've heard many other people say that when they're confronted with great fear, they just assume they're already dead. And that somehow clears the mind and they can get on with stuff. So symbols can be very powerful, and they've been around for a very long time indeed. And I have a book here that my daughter was kind enough to buy for me one Christmas, I think. And it was when I first started to investigate symbols and their history. And this book is called The Mystic Symbols. And as you can see, it's a pretty thick book with probably thousands of symbols in it. And it was only very recently that I reminded myself or remembered that actually I have been using symbols for almost all of my career. And the symbol that I have been using, that I'd be writing, many times every day, thousands of times over the years, is that symbol. Now, do any of you recognize that? I guarantee you would have seen it. So I'll give you...
Treatment.
Yes, I'm not quite sure who said that, but you're absolutely...
Me, Laura.
Hello. Oh, hello, Laura. I'd expect you to know this. but even you might not know exactly what it means. This is an Egyptian hieroglyphic. And when a doctor writes a prescription, in the top left-hand corner, they'll always start RX. And indeed, there is a pharmacy chain in the States, if you've been there, and that's actually the name of the pharmacies. And literally translated from the Egyptian, it means, may the gods heal my patient. So it's a prayer to the Egyptian gods. And I bet 99% of doctors who do that don't even know that, and I didn't until I found it by accident. I'll give you another example of a symbol. And that's a symbol that I use. I actually use it, and I've on my books and audiobooks, sometimes on the title, I'll put this symbol after my name. And it's very rare if somebody asks me what it is. But what it is, it's a Greek letter, and it's a capital P in the Greek alphabet. And that is called phi, P-H-I. And I chose that when I started my second career, because I thought, well, you know, capital P, it stands for peace. And my website at that time was a very clunky website. I don't use it anymore, but it was called Mind Your Peace and Cues, which is a bit of a play on words of some NLP ideas as well. Little did I know. And then I was talking to somebody and said, well, you know, if you're going to have a symbol, you should use it. And I said, well, how on earth do you use it other than put it on your website? And he said, well, you can use it when you're meditating, you can think about it, or you can even metaphorically give this symbol to other people. If you're in a therapeutic session with somebody, you might, you know, be thinking of the symbol at the same time you're thinking of what's going on in the consultation. And again, it was fairly recently, this symbol that I stumbled across. I was searching through Wikipedia, as I guess we all do, and I found that this symbol called phi is probably the most important symbol in classical mathematics, and probably in anything, because it's the symbol that's used for the golden ratio. And the golden ratio began to be understood during the Renaissance period, and is still used by scientists. And apparently the symbol is valid for just about any kind of mathematical prediction. So I chose something by accident. And how strange in life that sometimes the best things are perhaps not the things that we choose, but the things that choose us. And we say, well, that happened by accident. Of course, now I say, well, it happened through synchronicity. Because synchronicity is something we've talked about in previous shows, and we might even talk about it today. I don't know. So anyway, that's how I was just going to start kicking things off last week, but I forgot. And I guess I shouldn't have worried, because sometimes these things are meant to be. Because it meant for this week, I've had a chance to think a bit more about it. And so it would have just been a 30-second bit last week. Now it's been a little bit longer, and hopefully the time was well spent. So as Greg said, we do want to make this interactive. We do want to deal with questions, and we'll see what happens. So I know that a few people have been posting things in the chat box. Greg, I don't know whether there's anything that is particularly relevant that we might kick off with, or please raise your hand, because this show depends on...
It was actually me just writing that I forgot to tell everyone that if you have a question, just raise your hand so I can spot it, or use the reaction box, the hand, so I can see and call you out. There's a first question from Angela, but Angela, you can ask it yourself.
What does the golden ratio actually mean?
Well, that's a very good question. And I think you're going to find a better answer by going to Wikipedia, because it's a while since I've read about it. But if you have read The Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown, which is a huge international bestseller, I believe that it's in that book where he talks about it a lot. But from what I remember, if every proportion in art, and every proportion in the human body, and every proportion in biology can somehow be related to this ratio. like the length of my forearm will be related to the length of my upper arm. And similarly, the length of one's fingers will be, they can all be calculated, the relationship to each other through the golden ratio. And I think the golden ratio is particularly useful when working out the geometry of spirals. And if you think of the double helix in genetics, or if you think of the spiral shells that you see on the beach, the ratio can be used to that. So I think it's universal, and that's a pretty loose answer, but I guess if it makes you feel curious to know more, then it's probably a good answer.
Ludwig, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, and hi everyone. Thank you, Stephen.
Hello, Ludwig. Welcome.
For this meeting again. And as you can see, I caught you in on my way to home, and I'm on the gas station. But I found this gas station, and I think it's a kind of synchronicity in this moment for me, or very good luck. But my question is, because you said about this golden ratio, I thought, does it has any connections with fractals? You know, this does the golden ratio, does it, this rules works also with the fractals? You know, the fractals.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what that word is. Do you mean fractions? Is that another word meaning the same thing? No.
No.
There's a few people
Okay.
in the head. They obviously know more than me. Okay, explain a bit more, Ludwig. Oh, fractal. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure if my English is good enough to explain what the fractals is, or fractals are, but. Fractals are everywhere. We can this theory about fractals talk about how the trees looks, you know, how DNA looks, etc., etc. It's so complicated. So I thought maybe it's connected with a golden ratio.
Ludwig, that word fractal was new to me, but certainly not to some of the people on the program, but I know exactly what it is, even if I didn't recognize the word. And it's exactly as you say. It applies to the DNA, which is the double helix. It definitely does, and certainly the proportions of the trees. And in classical art, it's any sort of artist trained in the classical know would know what the golden ratio was, and cameramen to this day do, because when they compose a shot in a movie, generally speaking, it's not accidental that all the things in frame seem to be in roughly the right place, or exactly the right place.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
I'm a cameraman. I'm a photographer too, so I know this. You know, golden rules for a picture. And I have a second question, because I'm addicted, and I'm sober for several years. And my question is about Zen, because there's many well-known sentences for recovery in therapy, in spiritual way of recovery from addictions, and one of them is let go, let God, for example. Does it work also with the Zen? Because I don't know anything about the Zen. I just wanted to say that.
well, it does, because in a nutshell, Zen is letting go. It's letting go specifically of the attachments that we have to emotions and to behaviors. But perhaps the attachment to emotions is the most important. And I thank you for sharing a bit of your background with us, and because you highlight a huge problem in society, particularly Western society, but not exclusively, and that is addictive behavior. And there are so many examples of addictive behavior, and some of them would be seen as completely harmless, and some would be seen as extremely dangerous. So the whole spectrum is there. And just because there are over 300 branches of psychotherapy, and just over there are so many different treatment regimes for addictive behavior, that tells me that there's no magic bullet. And it also tells me that all of these systems must have some benefit, otherwise they wouldn't be there. They must be able to help some people some of the time. And certainly, I mentioned, I think probably in the last show, there are many people who embrace the concepts of Zen, and they will go to a Zen monastery or a retreat or something like that for usually at least a month, maybe even more. Sometimes they might even spend the rest of their life there, although that would be very unusual. So you can certainly put Zen in that bucket. Now, my views on addiction, and I'm not an addiction specialist, these are just my personal views, is that when I used to work particularly in Africa, my jobs there medically would be very broad. And one of the things was, because I was a recognized doctor in a particular field in a country like Nigeria or Angola, that I'd be approached by outside parties. And for instance, if the US president was going to visit Nigeria, then the hospitals that I managed would be put on standby because they would have been vetted as meeting the standards that they were looking for. I'm not saying they were the best hospitals, but it was certainly what people were looking for. And again, I'd have airline companies, getting in touch with me. They wanted to know about medical facilities in this country, what were the health risks, all these kind of things. So these kind of questions were very common. Less common were people who wanted to have a personal phone call with me. And the phone call would go something like this. I've been offered a job by my multinational company to come and work in wherever it might be, let's say Nigeria. And what I need to know is, I'm a recovering alcoholic, and I want to know if there's an AA group in Lagos. And when I'd been there for long enough, I knew there was, and there might have been more than one for all I knew. But my job was to just reassure this person that there was somewhere where they could go as soon as the plane landed, pretty much, if they felt the need to do that. And I'd always, try and ask a few more little questions, maybe for my own interest, but I think they were probably well-intentioned. And I remember asking one gentleman, how long have you been recovering for? And he said 30 years. Now, I was quite shocked because to me, if you've been, maybe it's just the words, but if you've been recovering for 30 years, to me, that's not recovering. And that's the problem that I have with some of these programs. They almost make people feel like they're a victim and that they're recovering, and they'll be in recovery until the day they take their last mortal breath. And I think that's sad. And I'd like to think there's a better way. Not that I know what that better way is. But the other thing that I'd say is that with some of these issues that I've worked with people in the past, it generally comes out that it's not the addiction. This is a very general comment now. It's not the addiction that's the main issue. It's the addiction that's the presenting issue, but there will be something underneath that is driving that behavior. And I can see you on my screen, Ludwig, and you're nodding here. So that's something that I'm saying is resonating with you. And I think unless you address the thing that's underneath, you're just playing the sticking plaster game, even if it keeps people off the booze in this case. So there you are, Ludwig. Forgive my ignorance on this matter. You clearly have a lot more experience in this than me, first-hand experience. And I just wondered, what do you think of what I said?
Thank you. Yeah, this is exactly the problem. So, because addiction is after our the time of we growing up, etc. Our situations in our families, first girls, everything which build us till the moment we got to AA, to therapy or something. And my experience is the therapy or AA is a beginning, very good beginning. It gave a lot of tools how to recovery from this addiction, but this is the beginning. It's like a startup for new life, and I got over there many tools, and I got I found a God, my God. I call it God, universe, higher power, etc. This is all in one, I believe. And what is next? If I would stopped only in on therapy or AA, I probably when I would go to any country, I'm 7 years sober. I would probably looking for like this man, the first meeting in the hood. But what I found, what I know right now about myself is I need to be in some process. Right now, I'm here. I stopped on my way to home to be here because I take a lot of from our meetings in here, and this is the next part of my way. And my way, you know, it's only 7 years. It's just like that. I'm pretty sure it's only tiny piece of time, and I have a lot of time in front of me. Of course, everything can happen, but what I wanted, that's why I asked about Zen, because this let go, let God, this let it go, or I'm sorry for my for my language, fuck it, as they say. This is what helps me in the worst moments in my life. Just I can't keep my life like that as I tried through my whole life, and just okay, let it go.
Yeah,
nice way.
Well, there are a couple of hands I think I can see. Even what I can see is I'm sure Greg is watching these things. So Ludwig, you're resonating a chord. You're chiming with some people here. That is for sure. And the way that you're expressing it is extremely eloquent. And so you don't need to apologize for your words, and your hands are even telling the story. You know, like you just can't let go of this. And the language, the two words that you used, which I'm not going to repeat, but this is a family show. But there's a book of that title, and I've read it, And a lot of people have got a lot of help from that sort of, it's not all about me. It is the letting go. And you also said, handing the problem to a higher power. Well, this is very much what we've been talking about when we've talked about infinite intelligence. If we think we're alone on this planet, it's going to be a very stressful, painful, hard life. But if we recognize that we're not alone, that we're unified in so many different ways, a lot of things get taken care of by whatever these higher powers might be. So that's enough for me. I know Robert, I think, wanted to say something, and Johnny as well. So perhaps if you come in first, Robert.
Hello, Dr. Steve. Long time no see.
It is, and very nice, and thank you for joining the show. I'm glad you did.
Yeah, just a comment about addiction. I'm working down in Cornwall these days as a hypnotherapist, and I had a client come to me who wanted to stop smoking, but it turned out that he was a recovering heroin and crack addict. And so I'm trying to use the meta model to understand his triggers for the smoking kind of thing. And there I am, like chopping away at his deletions and distortions and so on. And I found that it was very difficult to get anywhere concrete with him, because all I was meeting was this kind of linguistic snowbank that it was like trying to claw my way through fog almost. But I got there in the end, and I was able to help him stop smoking, which was great. But anyway, my question is, concerning symbols, I must say I had never thought of using a symbol or sort of broadcasting a symbol in a therapy session. Could it be used more generally than that, to kind of to fire off a flare or something, to say, here I am, almost as advertising. In fact, exactly as advertising. Any thoughts?
Well, I'm not. I'll leave it for you to decide whether you wish to use it for advertising. But maybe it's a good idea, but I wouldn't quite know how to do that myself.
Right.
What I would say, perhaps taking it back to a more initial level, is I really would recommend that all of you just try it, because I know it will sound absolutely crazy to most people, but the thing is, I've talked about magic. I've given you examples of magic. My books are, talk about magic. By magic, I mean things that I can't explain. And there've been so many of them. And it's almost like, going back to a previous comment, it's like, trusting higher powers or something. It's like we don't have to do too much. I mean, when I started out in my second career, because of circumstances, I carved a niche as a mind coach in professional golf, and quite a successful one. I worked on the European tours, and I met a lot of top players, and it was fun. And I would sometimes use symbols then, but more so in club golf, because I don't play much golf these days, but I used to, because I was living on a golf course, and it's part of my job in a way. And I remember playing with a very aged Irishman. He was a lovely guy, but he could hardly walk, and because his knees were so disfigured with arthritis. And we played this hole, which was the par 3 hole, and you have to go over a lake. And his name was Patrick, and he said, Steve, I've never got over this lake. My ball always goes into the water. And I couldn't turn off my switch, and I said, look, Patrick, why don't you have a different picture in your head that the ball does go over the lake? And if you want, let the ball go into the hole. And he laughed and he said, I can't see that happening. Now, when somebody says, I can't see it, it's saying they can't visualize that happening. So if you try and break that down, sometimes, you know, less is more, and you won't get rid of that block. So I didn't pursue that any further. I said, well, look, I think you might be able to see the ball at least getting on the green. Would that be a start? He said, oh yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Well, as you can probably guess, he didn't knock the ball in the hole for a hole-in-one. That would have been a magic thing. But he definitely got the ball on the green and not too far away from the hole, which he'd never done before. So he was well pleased with that. Was that coincidence? Well, if coincidence is synchronicity, then it was. But the thing is that where the logic starts falling apart is I see this stuff all the time. I've got so many examples. So don't know how we got onto that, Robert, but the message is, folks, just try with these symbols. Choose a symbol. It can be whatever you want, and just practice writing it. Funnily enough, there's a golf coach, one of the top technical golf coaches in the world that I've spent some time with in the States, and he asked me about symbols, and because he'd noticed mine, and I told him what I used it for. He said, that's incredible. He said, you know, when I'm in the shower and it all gets steamy, this is the shape that I write on the shower. And so there we are. And that's honest truth. That's what he said. So there you go. So well worth experimenting with. I never use the magic for myself. Maybe that's superstition. Perhaps I should. But I certainly use it freely if I can with others.
Sure. Just one thing, and then I'll mute myself again. I'm wondering if using magic to advertise, maybe the universe wouldn't like that because it would be selfish. I don't know. Just a thought. Anyway,
all right. Well, anyway, thanks for that thought, Robert. And I don't think it's particularly selfish. But I was thinking more, you know, you might get into trouble with the Advertising Standards Agency. You know, they'll say, prove the magic and stuff like that. I think it's probably something best left in the background. And if anybody does ask you what you think about magic, well, then you're entitled to your own opinions, just like I'm entitled to my opinions. I don't need to apologize to anybody for them, but you know, I don't think they'd be considered mainstream, certainly not in the medical profession. Did we have any other questions?
Yes, Johnny, go ahead.
Hi, I was just Ludwig, just listening to your story, mate. I've experienced the same level of addiction that was born about through some life-changing circumstances and depression. And I think that understanding that there is this universal law that will put you on the right path is definitely helpful. And I think in Steve's book, the Psychic Revolution, it talks about that, knowing that there are these giants and a bigger person out there to guide us. But also with your experience having been through this, I found for myself serving others and helping others that are in the same situation as you can be highly rewarding. And if you can give 5 years experience over 5 hours and help someone avert some of the mistakes that maybe you've made or the pain, you can turn the pain from resentment into pain into wisdom. So I've been there and you know, through the depression and addiction, felt suicidal, but I felt that a big release was always feeling connected. You know, shows like this, having the ability to talk, and then putting yourself in a situation where you can serve others that are also struggling can be massively helpful. That's me. I just wanted to share that with Ludwig, just to know that you're not alone, mate. I've been there and still going through the same battles. But as Dr. Stephen Simpson always says, the darkest hour is the hour just before dawn.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Johnny, for sharing that as well. You've certainly been on a journey and it's tested you, but you've come out the other side. And I totally resonate with your ideas about by helping others, one is also helping oneself. We're not doing it for that reason, but that definitely seems to be the spin-off. And thank you also for mentioning my book. As it happened, I had it here and Johnny wasn't primed. So this is some advertising, because that is it, the Psychic Revolution. Whenever people ask me about my latest book, I spend most of the time talking about how it's spelt and why it's spelt like that. So maybe the title wasn't the best in that way, but still, I like it the best. And I think it's the best book that I've written. And there are books that I've written that have sold a lot more than that, but I still think that that's because really that brings all the stuff that I've been working on the last 12 years or so. It's kind of distilled to what I think are the important things. And when I meet somebody for the first time or a client for the first time, a difficult concept that I have to try and get over without losing their interest is that this is a journey. When we start to look inside ourselves, it starts to become spiritual, and it's definitely a journey that can be a journey for the rest of our life. And that's what Carl Jung called the individuation. He said it's a journey, and I think it's a journey until we reach spiritual enlightenment or we meet God, or some words like that I think he used. And when people always want, obviously, just like I would, they want to know, come on, what is that magic bullet? What is that magic bullet now that I can use that's going to turn my whole life around? But unfortunately, it can't be as easy as that. We do have to touch all the bases in a certain order. And that's what I've tried to do in the Psychotic Revolution. I've tried to go back to history to understand our evolution as biological species. And that leads us on to the evolution of our brain and why we think the way we think. You know, how the reptile brain, the reptile instincts that we have are so underrated, perhaps in conventional neurophysiology or neuropsychology. But I think most human behaviors can be explained by reptile instincts. And I've mentioned before that sadly, this veneer of civilization that we all have is a thin one. And when you put people under pressure, you start to see what's underneath. And sometimes, pretty ugly. And we're all living under pressure at the moment now with this virus thing that's going around the world. And a lot of people are not handling this very well. We're not seeing them at their best, that's for sure. And they don't understand why. But of course, on the other hand, we're seeing that this is an opportunity that some people are using that brings out the best in them. And they're starting to do stuff that they've never done before. And definitely they're starting to reach out to the community to help people who are, can't get out at all, running, getting their prescriptions and food and all that kind of stuff. There's an awful lot of goodness in people that I'm seeing, which fortunately is a lot more than some of the reptile behaviors. But I'm not judgmental about those behaviors either, because this is just the way people are reacting to stress that they can't handle because they've never been there before. So what else have we got? Robert, I think.
Yeah, we've got Christine.
Robert and Christine, okay, fair enough.
Christine, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. My question is, or really a topic for discussion, it comes from a statement which says happiness equals reality minus expectations. So is managing expectations a reliable way to boost happiness?
You always ask the most tricky questions. You never let me down. Well, I've never heard of that particular equation, but I can say straight away that I'm sure it's spot on. It's right on the money, because wearing my coaching hat, the one thing, particularly with sports people who are going to be super competitive, because that's the way they all are, is managing their expectations, because they have an expectation that they're going to be the best. They have an expectation they're going to win this number of tournaments this year, this amount of money. They're going to get these kind of sponsorship deals. And that's one of the first conversations that we have. And it's often a very difficult conversation, because I have to get across to them without giving the air of confronting them, that these expectations they have are actually not very important. The trouble is they've had so many coaches over the years, or authority figures, who have said that these are critical. If you want to be number one in the world, you have to do this, that, and the other, blah, blah, blah. And it becomes ingrained behavior. But, and it puts sports people under pressure. And we've talked about this before, performance anxiety. Pressure causes performance anxiety and takes away from happiness. So to me, happiness is, I remember minus expectation. What was the other bit, Christine?
Is managing expectations a reliable way of boosting happiness?
Of boosting happiness. It certainly is. I think the happiest man in the world, or happiest woman in the world, is one who doesn't have any expectation. I think I've heard the Dalai Lama say something similar to that, but saying it much better than I could. It's a big part of Zen. It's this attachment, letting go of these attachments, attachment to an expectation. I would say the less attachment that you have to anything gives you the best chance of happiness. But you'd also be missing out on some stuff, because, we are not, we are social. We are social animals. So we're going to have expectations, that we're going to have relationships. We may have children. And to say you can't have attachment to your children or your husband or your wife or your partner would be crazy. So I don't think Zen goes that far in most people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think my difficulty, although I sort of understand those statements, is where expectations, they can lead to disappointment if they're too high, but then one wants to be in a place where one has some goal, but not to let the goal be destructive, and then not to be so laid back that one's sort of lazy and just waiting for things to happen. Yeah,
I know where you're coming from, because I've had those kind of dilemmas as well, for sure. But the strange thing is that when you stop setting goals and expectations, you actually become more creative. And certainly I don't see laziness creeping in anywhere in the people that I know well. In fact, it's more the opposite. It's that people probably are working too hard or whatever their project might be. Mm-hmm. They're not giving themselves enough downtime. So certainly with the elite performers that I work with, I have to say, work less, a lot more than I have to say, come on, you're being lazy. You need to get your boots on, do a bit of hard grunt work.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And are you watching the hands, Greg?
Yes, I do, and it's Sue.
Who's next?
Sue.
Sue.
Your turn.
Okay. And somebody also gave me a definition of disappointment is an expectation that hasn't been met. So having too many expectations can also lead to disappointment. So without especially unrealistic expectations, actually would lead to more happiness because you're not experiencing the disappointment.
I think you're absolutely right, Sue. I think that goes together. And very often in Olympic athletes, they will work all of their career to have one shot, if they're lucky, of being in an Olympics, because an athlete's career is usually fairly short. There are some people who seem to keep going, like Usain Bolt, but most people have one shot. And so it's their opportunity to fulfill all of their potential and all of their hard work and training. And what often happens, very often in the week or two or the month before the event, they get sick. Often it's a virus, because perhaps they've overtrained or they've overstressed. So that's talk about disappointment. That's huge disappointment. In fact, I know somebody like that. I know an oarsman for the Great British team who, his name is Alex Partridge, and that was tragic because he got a burst lung, I think, literally about a month before the tournament, and the GB team they won their gold medal, And in fact, if you watch the replay, you'll see they named their boat Alex because they sent him the message that, you know, Alex, Alex was in their hearts. So of course, poor Alex would have been gutted. He wasn't a client of mine, by the way. He's just somebody that I met, and I used to go on a run with him on a Friday. He would finish more or less by the time I'd ran the first 100 meters, from what I remember. So yeah, expectation. And of course, if they do win their Olympic medal, or if they're a golfer or a tennis player and they win their major, very often when they get it, it's like Bob Geldof said after Band-Aid, you know, well, is that it? What's next? There's a huge anticlimax very often. And unless this elite performer can rebuild themselves and find some other way that they're going to carry on the rest of their career or satisfaction in different ways, certainly that can be very unbalancing for them. So yeah, definitely agree with all the comments that you've made about expectation. It's not an easy one to let go of expectation, but the more you practice it, it does get easier. So generally, I'd say to people, do what you enjoy doing. I mean, we all have to pay for the mortgage and food on the table and all that kind of stuff. But if possible, if you have that luxury, do what you really enjoy. And if you can get income from it as well, then you're a lucky person. We have time for one more, Greg, if there is anybody, or
I haven't seen anyone.
You don't see anybody?
I haven't seen anyone unless I missed someone raising hand.
I've got a message on my box that Robin wants to say something, or is that an old one? Is that an old message? No. Okay, folks.
Yeah, there is Angela.
Oh.
She never lets us down in the end.
Right. There you go. I can't pass it up.
Okay.
So I got to jump on the wagon with literally Ludwig and Johnny. But the 12 steps, see, I see how you're seeing it, Stephen. But for me, 30 years ago, it set me free. Those 12 steps. And it's not going to meetings. Going to meetings is about service. And so I don't do it that way anymore because the people that I started with were so phenomenal. I couldn't find that group of people, but it's led me to other groups of people in different situations. The 12 steps were the foundation. They're the kind of, this is how you go about it. The first 3 are how to find your God. And just as Ludwig and Johnny said, it's my God. It's my God. It's not somebody else's who told me about who this dude is and how it is. It's what I discovered for myself. And the only thing I know about it, the only thing I know about it is that it is, period. So I have that truth as the foundation. Beyond that, I can believe anything I want to believe.
Thank you. Thanks, Angela, for putting that so eloquently. And you certainly have done. And I hope I didn't give the impression that I'm kind of trashing AA and 12 steps, because I'm not. I've seen multiple cases of how it's helped people through. So there's clearly something in it. Well, definitely. I mean, life-changing for people. And taking the ownership of this infinite intelligence or whatever it is. Yeah, I can see how that helps people, and I wouldn't want it to be any other way, obviously. So thanks for saying that. I think that's a good note to end on, because it ends on bringing everything together on a high note. I hope. So thank you for turning up today, as usual. Same time, and you'll notice it's a different format on Eventbrite now. They've improved some of their processes. It's a lot easier to sign up for stuff, and I've put multiple dates down, so hopefully it'll be a lot easier for you, and you can just click as fewer buttons as possible. That's how we measure happiness in today's society, how few buttons we have to press. Okay, stay well, everybody. Use your symbols with good intent, and see what happens and report back next week. Goodbye for now.